Rethinking Heroes, Life After the Military with Carrie Harrison.
Carrie Harrison with you, your new best friend. Don't forget that we here on Rethinking Heroes have done the unimaginable, the impossible. We have wrestled a pharmaceutical company to its knees, put our foot on its neck, and they agreed. Why? Well, because there are some live humans in that industry, not many, but a few, who are becoming enlightened. That is a teaser for what's coming up later in the show. Enlightened people who do a full turnaround, a full mea culpa, and actually set out and truly help the world. The same tricks of their trade that brought the world down, when reversed, when inverted, can do extraordinary good. And we're going to hear from one such person in a minute. But let me tell you about our Rethinking Heroes card. It's super easy, and if you're listening to KPFK, you are qualified to get it. How much does it cost? Nothing. Well, should you have to pull out a credit card? Nope. Do they want your intimate information? Nope. Does it ever expire? Nope. And you get up to 90% off your medications. If you're an American citizen, you live in the land of e pluribus unum, the land of whatever it is today, nowadays, as we all see it, you pay. Boy, do you pay. If you're sick and really sick and you're a veteran and you don't have $800,000 to get a hip replacement because that your hip problem is not directly connected to your military service, so the VA won't cover it, and you have to pay out of pocket just like all the rest of us. I know. What? I thought it was all free. Oh, no, it's not. But this is a workaround for you. For your medications, for all of our medications, imagine up to 90% off. No questions asked. All you have to do is go to rethinkingheroes.com. It's a free digital download. That card for you right here, right now. Tell your friends, tell everyone, tell the planet. The more people that use it, the more people that save money. And saving money, if that's all we can do here, because you, the listener, you who have been with us here on KPFK, here on public radio for years and years, giving, because you need this information, because you know it will be found nowhere else. We find ways to give back to you. So it's not a one-way street, because it does feel like that a lot. I mean, let's face it. In other countries, public radio is funded through people's taxes. Why? Because it is a public benefit, like having a fire department, like having street lamps, like having things every single person actually needs. Likewise, public radio is considered part of the educational platform and is therefore comfortably funded, but not in the US, though it is still in tiny little dribs and drabs. But our current government is doing everything it can to pull that plug at the speed of light. So if we can give back to you for giving to us, we will. Just go to rethinkingheroes.com, download your free card, spread it around. If you don't have a color printer or a computer, you can go to a public library. And there it is for free at rethinkingheroes.com. You can give KPFK a big kiss on the cheek for that one. And Rethinking Heroes, because we went out and we made this happen, and there will be lots more to come. So let's have some fun today. Let's blow your minds. Blow your minds with a guy who, transformed much of the area south of here all the way down to the bottom of the planet. And he admits, not in a good way, but he has fully reversed that. He is an economic hitman. We heard earlier in my newscast, we talked about a guy who agreed to be a hitman for $5,000 to go kill someone. The FBI arrested him. Well, then there are people that do it economically. So there's no bullets necessarily flying, but people end up in debt. They can't pay it, and it is a giant thing. How does it happen, and who's doing it today? The Chinese are doing it today, right in front of you, but not on the QT like this guy did. Let me introduce to you John Perkins. He has rethought his life service, becoming a New York Times best-selling author known for his book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. That's the original book. He's got a new one now, which is the third edition, where we do talk about China. We do talk about Russia. We do talk about that which is relevant to you, to me, today, right now. But in that original book, in which John Perkins describes his direct role in the economic colonization of third world countries as sort of an economic hitman. And he was seduced and hired by the National Security Agency, or NSA. Mr. Perkins wrote that he worked at the behest of a cabal of corporations, of banks, even the United States government. Needless to say, his first book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, was met with denials and overt rebuttals by involved parties. Go figure. John's books on economics, on geopolitics, indigenous cultures have sold millions of copies in more than 35 languages and spent more than 70 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. In this riveting third edition of this New York Times bestselling title, John Perkins expands his focus to China, exposes the global corruption on an international scale, offers the much-needed solutions you and I seek not only to survive, but to flourish amidst the chaos that you and I cannot disagree exists so universally, so wholeheartedly, in such tsunamis and tidal waves that there are barely words. But there are words like, hello and welcome, John Perkins.
Thank you, Kerry. It's great to be with you. I'm a little disappointed that hitman gets $5,000, but you're selling my book for $100. But actually, I'm really happy that you are.
Yes. Well, I think in your old life it might have been kind of interesting, but in your new life, you give way more than you receive, and that is really the quotient of good citizenship here. And I'm going to play a video, and this is one that you recorded. It's a trailer for your book, but it kind of lays out who and what you did so that we can sculpt a nice, easy picture for folks. Otherwise, I'd have to ask you 84 questions, 9 hours would pass. And, as much fun as it is for you and me, let's just cut to the chase, and then we'll come back, talk to you, find out about your latest book and what you and I can do about it. This is John Perkins talking about this third edition. This is the guy who, well, take a listen.
The drive of empire builders to dominate their world has gone on for thousands of years. But it took a new turn in the 1970s when I was an economic hitman. The war in Vietnam, the debacle of Vietnam, pretty much proved that this could no longer be done through military forces. And so the idea was to dominate economically. And my job was to identify countries with resources our corporations wanted, like oil or minerals, other resources, and then to arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. The money had to go to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country, like electric power systems and industrial parks, things that benefited a few wealthy families in those countries, as well as our own corporations that made big profits. But it put the countries into deep debt. And then we basically owned them. We became part of our empire. We could dictate to them at what prices they would sell the resources that our corporations wanted. We could tell them to vote with us at the United Nations against Cuba or something else and let us build a military base on their soil. We were extremely good at this. But now along comes China. In this new book that I've written, which is really the third edition of the Confessions of an Economic Hitman series, this one focuses on China's strategy. And China has learned from the mistakes that I and other economic hitmen from the United States made, and also from our successes. So China's doing a much more effective job. It's taken over much of the world. It is the #1 trading partner, the #1 investor in countries all over the world: Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, Asia, even Europe, even the United States. And so China has really come to dominate this whole process. They have taken this economic hitman strategy to new levels. But what's important is to understand that no matter who uses this economic hitman strategy, whether it's the United States or China, it doesn't matter. It's taking us into destruction. It's taking us to climate change, income inequality, species extinction, environmental destruction. Those are all symptoms of the death economy, an economic system that's polluting and consuming itself into extinction. And it's run by one goal alone, and that is to maximize short-term profits and materialistic consumption. That's the goal of the United States as economic hitman. That's the goal of China's economic hitman. And so what we need to understand is this has to end. We're headed toward the precipice as humans on this planet. We've got to turn this around. And China and the United States can disagree on everything else. We can disagree on everything else. It doesn't matter what it is. We can fault them for what they're doing in Taiwan and Hong Kong. They can fault us for what we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan and on. But let's agree that we've got to end climate change. We've got to end species extinctions. We've got to end environmental destruction. We've got to transform the death economy to a life economy. And this is where I find my book, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, third edition, to be extremely important. It's the best book and the most important one I've ever written. I'm totally convinced of this because it outlines a plan for how we can transform the death economy to a life economy. And it actually talks about how each individual can do this. It sets up a whole process whereby every reader, you, all of you, every reader, can look at what do I most want to do for the rest of my life? What'll bring me the greatest satisfaction? And how do I do this in a way that participates in transforming the death economy to a life economy? We are at an incredible time in human history. I feel blessed. We all should feel blessed. You should feel blessed that you're alive at this time where we have these huge challenges, but also an incredible opportunity to redefine, to redirect what it means to be human beings being on this planet, this incredibly beautiful planet that we're inheriting and that we have a responsibility to pass on to future generations. We are at this incredible time in human history. Let's feel so blessed to be part of it. Thank you.
Carrie Harrison with you. We are talking right now to John Perkins. He is why would the U.S. government want to have an economic hitman? It just seems so un-Benjamin Franklin.
Well, it's like you said earlier in the program, after the failure of the war in Vietnam, we discovered that, we couldn't really spread our form of capitalism around the world through military power, which was kind of the traditional way historically that empires have been built. And I want to say that this is not so much an American empire as a corporate empire that's supported by the U.S. government in many ways. And there's this constant interchange between executives at companies and government agencies and so on and so forth. But after Vietnam, we realized that the way to go was through debt, through economic control rather than military control. And that's exactly what I was brought in to do. So it's, this whole strategy is a way of getting countries to be dependent on us, to be in our orbit, our circle. And back in my day, it was against the Soviet Union. So, we were locked in the Cold War, the struggle to outdo the Soviet Union, to bring more countries into our orbit than the Soviets could bring into theirs. And then after 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we became the sole superpower for more than 2 decades. Now, beginning around 2012, the Chinese have emerged, and China's economic hitmen have pretty much taken over in a very efficient sort of way.
Carrie Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes, rethinkingheroes.com. You can go to that website right here, right now. And as a special gift, just because you're listening, our way of giving back, in fact, every radio station that is carrying Rethinking Heroes, our way of giving back to you, the audience at large, is for you to have up to 90% off on your medications. I know if you're in Europe listening, you're going, what is he talking about? Medications are free. What is he talking about? I can go to the doctor for free. Well, we can't. So we have to make sure we take care of each other, because if we don't, no one else will. 90% off your prescriptions. It's good across 65,000 drugstores, coast to coast. And if you take blood pressure medicine, like what I think 1 billion of us do in the United States, well, there's only 350 million, but it feels like 1 billion, doesn't it? Certainly costs that much. Everything else, whatever your issue is, you probably take a pill for it. So you can most likely get a decent discount. Go to rethinkingheroes.com. It's for free and for fun. There's no fees, no credit cards, nothing, no expiration. It is an absolute pure piece of mana for you. As we talk to John Perkins, we're talking about this idea of being an economic hitman. And let's just lay this out for people who might be 18 and streaming, who sort of can't wrap their head around the skullduggery, the James Bond of it all, the Jack Ryan of it all, that you went out on behalf of oil companies, on behalf of other companies. You would get countries that were not doing well and needed infrastructure, new bridges, maybe some schools, things that we all think are a great idea. You would make sure that they could get that, basically a loan. And then if they can't really pay back the loan, they owe, baby. They own. And you come to collect. Something like that?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's it, Kerry, that we would go into these countries knowing that what we really wanted was what they put up as collateral, which was their oil. Or today it might be lithium or some of the minerals that are necessary for the green economy. Give them a huge loan, and then the loan would have to be used to hire our corporations, the Halliburtons, the Bechtels, the Stone and Websters, to build big infrastructure projects in those countries. And like you mentioned, power plants, industrial parks, highways. These things benefited a few wealthy families in the country, as well as our own corporations that built them, that made huge profits off of them. But the majority of the people ended up suffering because money was diverted from healthcare, education, and other social services to pay the interest on the loan. And in the end, the principal couldn't be repaid. So we'd go back and say, okay, we'll give you a deal, give us your collateral, give our corporations your oil, basically at a very low price without environmental or social restrictions. And it was really a way of building a global empire and at the same time, bringing these resources home to the United States.
Let's talk for a second about what you did in the past. And then you had some kind of epiphany, didn't you? I mean, you didn't go from like taking down Earth to like building up Earth on a Tuesday because you woke up and said, I don't like the taste of this toothpaste.
Well, you're right. For most of the years that I did this, I thought I was doing the right thing, because in business school and by the World Bank, we're taught that the way to help a poor country prosper is to invest in billions of dollars in infrastructure like this. And you can actually show through econometric models that when you do make these investments, the GDP, the gross domestic product, increases. And everybody interprets that to mean that the country's doing better. The fact of the matter is, and I discovered this after a number of years in the business, that GDP is not a good measure. GDP measures how well the wealthy are doing, how well corporations are doing. And so really what I was selling was a fake story that everybody's going to do better when the economy rises, where in fact just a few families in the country were actually doing better. And I have to say, Kerry, I'm glad you brought up the whole lithium issue, because the lithium triangle, where the most lithium is probably in the world, is this triangle of three countries, Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia in Latin America. I worked in those countries as an economic hitman, and we caused a tremendous amount of resentment. In Chile, the CIA participated in the overthrow of the democratically elected president Allende and put into power Pinochet, who was a terrible dictator. We supported the brutal dictatorships in Argentina through Operation Condor, a huge CIA operation. And, we put down President Evo Morales in Bolivia. And this has all come back to haunt us, because now China has moved in and is controlling the lithium triangle. And basically, China is producing roughly 75% of all the world's lithium ion batteries, which are necessary for all electric cars and many other things, and the batteries of the future. As we want to move into this green economy, we have to understand that the United States needs to reevaluate its geopolitics, the way it looks at the world. We've got to move away from the economic hitman strategy that we've implemented. At the same time, we also have to realize that China's got to move away from this. These two countries create roughly almost 50% of the world's economy and about the same amount of pollution. If these two countries can't come together and agree that we've got to end climate change, we've got to end the economic system that we've created, a degenerative death economy, and turn it into an economy that pays people to clean up pollution, to regenerate destroyed environments, to recycle, then we're really doomed. And so I think the most important thing in this book is a plea to everybody, all your listeners, to get involved. And all of us can do this in a way that will bring us each our individual satisfaction in this movement toward creating a world that future generations of all species will want to inherit.
You're hearing the voice of John Perkins, and who better to tell you that there's hope and possibility than a guy who practice not hope and not possibility with expertise. Like, you can't really talk about something if you don't know anything about it. And if you know a lot about it, you can also find the solutions. You can invert it and make it work. I'm going to give another example. This is one that our listeners will understand. As you know, last week, we wiped out Rethinking Heroes wiped out $1 million in U.S. medical debt. $1 million in U.S. medical debt in the name of U.S. veterans. And we did that because a guy who was a former debt collector, who did very well, realized that if he just took his formula, flipped it around upside down, he could forgive debt as opposed to collecting debt. So then it became a nonprofit organization. And through that, through his epiphany, through his awareness, through his awakening, much as John Perkins here has, through that, we are now forgiving medical debt. This show, uniquely, there is no other radio show in the United States getting rid of $1 million in regular people's medical debt every single month. And it's spread across the U.S. and it's all done in the name of vets, which is why we're doing Rethinking Heroes. We are rethinking what real heroes are. And John Perkins, you fall in that category. You've not only written books like Confessions of an Economic Hitman, your first edition, second edition, and now third edition, Touching the Jaguar, the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman, Hoodwinked. Love that word. It's oldie Englishy. It's a great word. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Again, the original, The Secret History of the American Empire, Shape-Shifting, The World as You Dream It, Psycho-Navigation, The Stress-Free Habit, Spirit of the Schwar. It goes on. And now we have this third edition where you lay out who's doing what, how, and how you and I can survive this. Let me just reintroduce John Perkins because he's rethought his life's service, becoming a New York Times best-selling author known for that book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, right here, right now, with us on Rethinking Heroes, where you'll be able to see a copy of the video of this interview, including the video we played earlier of him explaining how and why he did what he did, simply by going to rethinkingheroes.com, where you can also download your free digital discount card, good at pharmacies coast to coast. 65,000 pharmacies where you can get up to 90% off your medications. Screw them. And we are. And I'll tell you what, without lube, it feels great giving people an awesome discount. All that you have paid into your systems and getting ripped off, we are unripping it off for you and making your life better. Go to rethinkingheroes.com. John Perkins describes his direct role in the economic colonization of the third world countries. And he told you about that and told you about the triangle right now where the lithium is being mined. And unlike when he was doing it, which was on the QT, which is very James Bond, flying around in planes, getting in cars, showing up, handshakes, little notes taped under seats. I'm sure I'm not way off here, John Perkins. The Chinese are doing it right out in front of everybody. Absolutely right out in front of everybody. But we don't know what to look for today. Is that right, John?
That's absolutely right, Kerry. And it's very fascinating that one of the reasons the Chinese can do it this way is because the Chinese government owns 50% or more in many of their biggest corporations, including the ones that are doing the mining, et cetera. So, they're not really competing with each other, these companies, because they're all working for the same end, which ultimately gives a lot of money to the Chinese government to help its people or do whatever it wants. It's actually brought 800 million people out of dire poverty in the last 30 years, which is more than the rest of the world has done combined. The Chinese have made terrible mistakes, and then they're building some awful projects in parts of the world. So I'm not defending that whole system, but I am saying that, as you pointed out, they're much more transparent. So when they make profits in these countries, a lot of that money goes to the government to use in whatever way it wants. In our case, many of our biggest corporations don't even pay taxes. So although they are benefiting, as you pointed out, from our streetlights and our fire departments and our police departments and our airports and so on and so forth, they're not contributing. So there's this huge discrepancy in the ways that these two governments and these two structures, these two governmental structures operate in the world. And I think that, the Chinese structure in that instance is more efficient than ours, and it's showing itself to be. which is not to say that I would favor their government over ours. I would not at all. And I don't think most of the world would. The countries where I spend a lot of time these days, I just came back from Latin America. I'm headed to Europe soon. They are buying into the Chinese trading system. They are buying into China's economic system. They're not buying into the government. They don't want to have the kind of government that China has, but they do want to partner with China in order to help develop their resources. I have kind of an interesting map here that you can see from this that the red marks are China's trading partners, and the blue ones are US's. China.
I'm going to describe it a little bit, John Perkins, for those who cannot see video and are just listening enjoyably on FM radio, a giant, thunderous broadcast, largest and strongest signal west of the Mississippi, such as we are here. It's a map that shows the Chinese reach. So we're looking at China and then red lines spreading out all across Africa, all across Eurasia. I mean, just really half of Earth. And then the United States, our blue lines pop out. They go over the Atlantic, sort of end in parts of Europe. They touch Africa. They go a little bit down Central America, and that's it. So size-wise, China looks to be about double its reach.
It's actually, Gary, almost, well, yeah, it's more than double. They have 124 countries versus our 56. As a where they are the number one trading partner. And that's all happened since 2012, 2013, when President Xi became the leader of China. So it's been very, very rapid. And again, I want to point out, however, that their goal is essentially the same as ours, and that is to bring resources into China. It's to maximize short-term materialistic consumption and profits, however you want to define profits. And in both cases, this is taking us to disaster. Our two countries are in a race. It's a competition. The goal line is disaster, And so why I wrote this third book is because, unlike the other two, which were published in 2014 and 2016, this third in the trilogy has come out at a time when we can see that we have to turn things around. If we want to survive on a planet any of us would recognize, we want to pass that on to our children, we've got to end climate change. We've got to end environmental destruction. We've got to end income inequality, and not just end these things, but reverse them, turn them around by producing a life economy that will pay people. We can make profits. We can pay people to regenerate the coral reefs in the oceans and regenerate other destroyed environments, and to clean up the pollution, mine all the plastics that are in the oceans, clean up pollution, pay people to recycle. We've come a long way recently in solar and wind, but we still got a long way to go. I have to say that, I'm very optimistic. I think we're moving in the right direction. And I just want to encourage all your listeners to realize that every one of us has a role to play. We're all victims of the system, but we also are collaborators in it. And we're the ones who can turn it around, and we can do it by realizing what we most want to do in our individual lives.
Very true, John Perkins. And anybody with a recent memory will recall two tornadoes in Los Angeles. That's impossible. It just doesn't happen. It's not meant to happen. The earth doesn't plan for that to happen. It's not normal. It's not. And absent any of the discussions, climate change. It's a freak, tornadoes in LA. No, it's not a freak accident. This is climate change. Just like the massive ocean rivers in the atmosphere or giant hurricanes in the southern part of Florida on the West Coast that scrub the tip of a state clean, wipe it clean. It's not an oops. It's not just a very angry hurricane, happens to be category 5. We don't see those ever, except maybe in Hollywood films made back in 2012. This is the reality of today. And if you ask any 14-year-old, 13-year-old, 12-year-old, and I just got back from Switzerland, so I'm wildly jet lagged right now, and I do appreciate your patience, because who knows what time it is for me. I was talking to them because I'm building a radio station for kids that are between 10 and 16. Why? Because they know the truth. They know what you're talking about, John Perkins. They know that this is everything, but their voices are forbidden on television or radio in the US. You never put them on because they're going to say it's real. And that's very inconvenient. And inconvenient truths are sort of the point of your book here. It's the official story and the official belief system, but anybody else that pierces that veil is going to get in trouble. And I think that's why I love reading your stuff. By the way, it's fun to read. May I just point that out? It is not didactic. It is not, this endless. It is fun because you're a fun guy. And what you have done is the fantasy of an Amazon Prime series. But you did it for real. And then, of course, you turned it all around. A lot of people are so cynical, so twisted, so soured, so brutalized. But I just want to touch on something. And we'll jump into hope. I was on a cruise ship, this is 8-9 years ago, and I was on with a former State Department guy under Ronald Reagan. And these old guys go do cruises and they give talks on cruise ships to generally pretty conservative audiences. And I asked him, so really, why were we in Vietnam? I mean, seriously, why were we in Vietnam? He said, well, Vietnam makes something. I said, they make something, huh? Which speaks back to your books, John Perkins. People who make things have reasons for us to visit, you to visit, us to visit as a government. They made tin and rubber. It turns out that tin ends up as a Budweiser can, and the rubber ends up as Ford tires on the cars. Since we got rid of our public transportation, we all drive cars. So what a good reason to go in and get it, among other reasons. But we don't seem to hate communists for real. I asked him, I said, well, Cubans are communists. Yes, they're very bad. I said, but the Chinese are communists and we have factories there. So good communists, bad communists, please help me understand the difference. Dead air, dead air, dead air. He left. I'm not completely nuts here, am I, John?
No, the difference, I can tell you what the difference is. The difference is that the Cubans, before Castro had Batista, and they were very supportive of U.S. businesses. So U.S. businesses made huge amounts of money there, particularly mafia-oriented businesses that own big casinos, but also the sugar industry and so on and so forth. And when Castro came in, he kicked them all out. So there was no more room for U.S. business. China, on the other hand, has welcomed U.S. business. And, we know that a lot of China's 30-year, 10% a year growth as a result of the fact that Americans built factories there or supported the building of factories there. And companies like Microsoft and Apple and so many others, the high-tech industry and other industries worked with China, and China welcomed U.S. dollars and U.S. business. That's the difference.
So that's a good commie.
Yeah, that's a good commie, one that supports American capitalism, And we saw the same thing. We saw in Chile, I mentioned earlier, where we had a democratically elected President Salvador Allende, and he said, well, we're not going to let the U.S. corporations exploit us anymore. We're gonna increase minimum wages. We're going to do a lot of things. We're going to nationalize some of the businesses where foreign companies, U.S. companies, that are making tremendous profits off our people. And so we replaced him with Pinochet, who was a brutal dictator but supported U.S. corporations. And so that's the factor. It's will a country be kind to U.S. corporations and invite them in and support them and give them tax breaks and so on and so forth. And it's a fascinating world from that standpoint. And again, once again, here we're seeing that China is just doing a better job of that than we did, because we ended up pissing off a lot of people. I like to say that I had an easy job, Carrie, because I could go in and I could say to the president of a company, hey, in this hand, I've got a few $1 billion for you and your people. We're going to build big infrastructure projects. You and your family and your friends, you own the industries. You own the big businesses. You're going to benefit from better electricity, more reliable electricity, better roads and highway ports and airports and so on and so forth. So take this loan, and you're going to put your people into tremendous debt that they'll never get out of, and we'll exploit your resources, but you'll make a lot of money, you and your friends. But if you don't do it, and this had got a gun. And I didn't actually have the gun, but I knew that right behind me were people we call jackals, who are CIA assets for the most part, who overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. And Chile, again, is a great example how that's exactly what happened there. It's what happened in Iran with Mossadegh. It's what happened in the Congo with Lumumba, and in Vietnam with Diem. And it's happened more recently in 2009 in Honduras with President Zelaya. So, that doesn't make friends, though. It may make friends with the government that we've installed for a period of time, but at some point that backfires. And that's what we're seeing today, as I mentioned, with the lithium triangle, where it's backfired with Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, and they're now turning to China. It's happened in Ecuador, where Ecuador has tremendous amounts of oil, cobalt, copper, gold, things that need to be part of the green economy, and China's taken over, and partly because there's a tremendous amount of resentment about the exploitation of those resources by U.S. corporations. And we're seeing it throughout Africa and throughout so much of the world. And, I'm a very loyal American. My family fought in the American Revolution.
Mine too.
I want to see us do better. I mean, we've some big mistakes. We deserve better. We can do better. We should do better. And better means setting an example for the world, including for China, that we can look to the long term. We can look to developing a green economy. We can be a leader in that. And I think we've been moving in that direction. I know we've been moving in that direction. The idea of conscious capitalism, the Green New Deal, benefit corporations, all the incredible advances that have been made in solar and wind and other technologies that get us electric cars, that get us out of fossil fuels. So that's the hope for the future. It's the hope for the future of the United States as a leader in the world, and it's also the hope for the future, for future generations to survive on a planet that they'll want to live on.
John Perkins, I was in an airport yesterday, and United Airlines had a giant poster on the wall showing one of their electric airplanes. It was a real airplane with live humans in it, completely electric by 2026. That's like 2 or 3 years from now. And it wasn't a fantasy, because I looked at it and I rubbed my chin. I said, Jesus, that's cool. So they mean it. And even if it's greed as a motivator, like, we're only going to survive if we do this, fine. It's reality. So at least they accept it. In fact, I think a lot of corporations accept climate change, because pretending it's not there means their customers all die and go away. And that's not really a great way to run a business. So I want to thank you and laud you for having written this 3rd edition, this extensively updated Confessions of an Economic Hitman 3rd edition, featuring 12 new chapters, including a new introduction, a new preface, and my favorite part, study guide. Carrie Harrison here with you. This is Rethinking Heroes, rethinkingheroes.com. Make sure you go to rethinkingheroes.com. Get your free discount card so that you can get up to 90% off your medications. Good at 65,000 drugstores across the country. You are already paying tens of thousands a year just to have the pleasure of medical insurance, which has nothing to do with if you actually need it or use it. This is a way where you can save thousands a year, thousands of dollars a year, potentially just on the medications alone. You deserve it. And we deserve to have you as a listener, and you deserve to have us find ways to pay you back while you support KPFK. John Perkins, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for down the road. We're going to be able to talk about your webinars and your subscription audios and cool stuff nobody on the planet is going to get anywhere else. And I can't wait for that either. Thank you for coming on KPFK today.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. I deeply, deeply appreciate what you do, Carrie. Thank you for doing what you do. And I'm so happy to support it in any way I can.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, Carrie Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes, rethinkingheroes.com.
Rethinking Heroes with Carrie Harrison. Life after the military. rethinkingheroes.com.